Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. First off, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. And, on behalf of the Weather Service, just like to say our hearts go out to those affected in the community from this tornado. And so what we wanted to do tonight is we wanted to bring the community together and basically give another chance to, go over the tornado in depth, talk about, a lot of the things that happened and some of the questions that you guys may have. I'm sure many of you sitting here are you're wondering things like, how does a tornado of this strength happen all the way up here in Gaylord? How rare is this for this area? And, what can I do better, or, what can my family do better in the future to help better prepare for, severe weather? And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go in depth into the rarity of the event, basically going over the ingredients that came together to allow that storm to produce the tornado that came through Gaylord that night, or that afternoon. And then we'll go a little bit more in depth into the damage, talk a little bit more about the storm survey, and then we'll go over some radar imagery and show some tidbits from that. We'll also go over some safety and preparedness information, which Pat Bach will go over. And then at the end, we'll give personal accounts. So myself, Pat, and Michael Stevens will give our personal accounts from that day. So we all worked that event, and so we'll share that with you guys. And then at the very end, like Jim said, we'll have a question and answer section. So any questions that you guys may have about the tornado event itself will be up here, and we'll be able to answer your questions. And so with that, I will begin by talking about how rare that tornado event was. And so touching on the damage survey, basically what our Weather Service office does, and Weather Service offices across the country do, is after every tornado, they go out and assess the damage. So survey teams go out to the damage path, and then based on the damage that they find, we assign a tornado rating. So tornadoes are rated by the enhanced Paglia scale, which is based on damage to structures and trees and other things that the tornado does. And so that scale ranges from 0 to 5, with 0 being the weakest, where you might see just damage to limbs or shingles, things like that, all the way up to an EF5 tornado, which is the strongest tornado that there is. They're very rare, and the type of damage that you would typically see with that are well-built homes completely destroyed, and the debris is swept completely clean of the foundation. And so those are the opposite ends of the spectrum. And so based on the damage that we found during our storm survey, we assigned the rating of an EF3 tornado. And so with our tornado specifically, the maximum estimated wind speed was 150 miles an hour. Now that is very impressive. And so not only was the peak strength impressive, how long it was on the ground for and the distance that it traveled was. And so the tornado was on the ground for almost 18 miles, which is a pretty long path length for a tornado for anywhere, and it was on the ground for 22 continuous minutes. And so I've got displayed on the background the tornado tracks from 1950 all the way up to 2021. So this shows all of the tornadoes, and that's basically as far back as reliable records go for tornadoes, as far as that is concerned. And so on the left, you'll see radar loops play, both a zoomed out version of northern Michigan and also a storm-centric view that will follow the tornado as it crosses, or the storm that produced the tornado as it crosses northern Michigan. And so just some facts about, the climatological, how rare the tornado was. Dating back to 1950 all the way up to 2021, before the Gaylord tornado, Gaylord has never been struck by a tornado. Those of you that have lived in the Gaylord area or around the Gaylord area for a while may remember the storm from 1998 that produced widespread wind damage across the north side of town, millions of dollars of damage. That was a straight line wind event, not a tornado. And so this is the first time that Gaylord has ever been impacted directly by a tornado. Going back to 1950, about 191 tornadoes have struck northern Michigan. So if you drew a line from Manistee all the way over towards the Gladwin area and then up to the bridge, and then the two easternmost counties of the Upper Peninsula, that is our forecast area. So within that area, there's been 191 tornadoes dating back to 1950. That might sound like a large number, but that averages out to around 2 or 3 tornadoes a year, which compared to other areas of the country really isn't that much. And so there's even years where we don't see any tornadoes in northern Michigan. We had the one this year in Gaylord. We had a weak tornado the year before that, but then in 2020 and 2019, there were no tornadoes. And you'd have to go back to 2018 for the next most recent time that northern Michigan saw a tornado. So like I said, you know, tornadoes just in northern Michigan are rare, but even a tornado of this strength is very rare. Looking at across the state, Michigan itself averages about 13 tornadoes a year, and the last EF3 tornado to strike in Michigan was over a decade ago. So that happened on March 15th, 2012 in Dexter, Michigan, and that's in the Weather Service office located in Detroit. That is their forecast area. So once again, it speaks not only to, you know, how rare, you know, those tornadoes of that strength are up in northern Michigan. They're very rare, you know, just across the state in general. And so what I'll go over now is the ingredients that came together in order to produce that, right? Because, you know, in order for a tornado or an event of that magnitude to happen, that's very rare. You know, a rare combination of ingredients likely came together. And so backtracking from that, storms basically need 4 main ingredients. So you can think of it like a recipe, say cookies, like we're out there in the break room. You know, you need flour, sugar, you know, chocolate chips, eggs. You know, you need a certain set of ingredients to make cookies. And it's the same way with thunderstorms, especially severe thunderstorms. And one of those ingredients, and the first one, is instability. And so you can think of a hot air balloon that rises. You know, the sun's radiation heats the ground, and the ground warms up that air, and that air becomes less dense than its surroundings, and that can allow it to rise. And so with the satellite imagery that's playing in the background, what you notice is that there's no clouds over northern Michigan. This is from the morning and then into the early afternoon of the day of the tornado. And so what that allowed for is it allowed for northern Michigan to heat up and for that instability to help build through the morning and into the afternoon, which is important. So that's, you know, one ingredient that's in place. A second main one is moisture. And while moisture also increases instability, it's also important for rain and thunderstorms in general. If you don't have moisture, you're not going to be able to form clouds, and you're certainly not going to be able to form, you know, thunderstorms. And so when you think about moisture, where do we get a lot of the moisture from? How do we get that, you know, moisture up to where we're at? It's not necessarily the Great Lakes that provides it. It's, you know, the Gulf of Mexico. So this weather analysis map that you see right here, it shows southerly winds drawing that warm, moisture-rich air from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up into Michigan. And so the combination of, you know, the sun, no cloud cover during the morning and into the afternoon, and that warm, moist air being drawn up into the state really sets the stage for thunderstorm development. And so when that's in place, all it needs is a little push in order to form thunderstorms. And that brings us to our third ingredient, which is lift. And so many of you might be familiar with a cold front, which is shown on the map as that blue line with the blue triangles in the direction that it's moving. What that cold front does is it basically acts like a wedge against the ground. So it's cold, it's more dense than that warm, moist air out in front of it, and as that moves forward, it forces that warm, moist air up. And so that's how you can get your thunderstorms to form. And that cold front that you see across Wisconsin was actually the main focus for thunderstorms that day. So earlier in the morning, thunderstorms formed along that cold front and eventually moved over Lake Michigan and then into northern Michigan, where they eventually impacted us. And so with those 3 ingredients, you'll get thunderstorms, but the fourth is really the separator between thunderstorms and severe thunderstorms. You know, it's kind of like cookies. You can have all the other ingredients except chocolate chips. You'll have a cookie, but it's not a chocolate chip cookie, you know? So that's kind of what it's like with this fourth ingredient. That fourth ingredient is wind shear. And so what wind shear is it's the change in wind speed, and it's a change in wind direction as you go higher up in the atmosphere, the further you get off the ground. And so what that would look like is, you know, let's say like 15-mile-an-hour winds near the surface, but those can increase all the way up to 50, 60, you know, even 100 miles an hour the higher you get off the ground. So that's one way, and the change in wind direction. So if you have those southerly winds, which we had in this case, you know, those can change to winds with height. So the combination of those two can help lead to rotating thunderstorms. And so those rotating thunderstorms is what will help produce that severe weather, whether it's big hail, strong winds, or in this case, a tornado. And so you can almost think of it like a spinning top. If you spin a top on a table, that it'll spin for a little bit, before it eventually topples over. It's kind of the same way with a rotating thunderstorm. When it's spinning like that, it can help maintain itself for a long time, or a longer time. And in this case, we saw that storm basically track all the way from Lake Michigan across all of northern Michigan and then over northern Lake Huron. And so with the change in wind speed with height, what's really important with thunderstorms is that all that rain-cooled air that it's dumping, all that heavy rain, the big hail in those thunderstorms, it stays away from where the storm is drawing its energy from. And so if anyone's heard of a thunderstorm updraft, that's where that comes. You can think of almost like a vacuum hose that's sucking in warm, moist air. That's where the thunderstorm gets its fuel and helps it sustain itself. So the change in wind speed with height, that can help push all that cold, that rain-cooled air with all the heavy rain and hail further away from the thunderstorm and keep it away from where the thunderstorm is drawing in its energy. And that's what we had in this case. And so displayed behind me has been probably a confusing image for you guys. And so what this is showing is the data that we launched from our special weather balloon that afternoon. So if you guys are familiar with the National Weather Service or our office, we routinely launch balloons twice a day. So we launch once in the morning and we launch once in the evening. So right around 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., 12 hours apart, depending on the time of year. It'll be 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. And so what those weather balloons do is they help gather data. So it takes temperature data, data on moisture, wind speed, wind direction, a bunch of different things, and it'll send it back to us. And so like I said, we routinely do that twice a day, but on special days, and May 20th was one of them, and if anyone's been paying attention to Hurricane Ian, a bunch of weather service offices across the country have been launching special balloons for that too. And so what these special launches can do is it gives us a really good look at the atmosphere in place, in this case, for severe thunderstorms. So you can kind of think of it like a blood draw or getting blood work, right? You can get a bunch of different, confusing results. Like you see here, you see a bunch of numbers and weird charts, different things like that. But for us meteorologists, we get a whole host of information that we can use to diagnose the atmosphere in place, including the severe weather ingredients that were in place that afternoon. So specifically, this balloon was launched by our forecasters just after 3 p.m. And I'll go over in a minute, but the tornado touched down at 3:35. So this weather balloon was launched basically just a half hour before the tornado touched down, and it launched from our office. So this was a very close, launch, basically right in the environment that storm is going to be using. So it provided very valuable data for us to use on the forecast desk. And so what this data showed us was an exceedingly rare environment that was in place to support the thunderstorms, that eventually went on to produce the tornado. And so with that being said, I'd like to change pace and go over the timeline of the tornado and some of the damage that we saw during the survey. And so, like I said, the tornado touched down at 3:35 p.m. that afternoon. And so, since this is where it touched down, typically see very, weak damage right where it touched down. So in this picture you see here, we see some metal roofing pulled off, and in the next picture we see a downed tree. This was just north of Olds Road, east of Alba Highway, for those that are familiar with that area. But just a minute later, it quickly intensified. And so at 3:36, it crossed Patterson Road, and it produced damage to a few houses and snapped numerous trees. And so this is an aerial view taken by the Civil Air Patrol. This is south looking towards the north. And so what you can see here is not only some damage to buildings, but you can see damage to trees as well. And what's important with all of those trees being downed is you can see trees being downed in different directions, basically swirled. So that can be an indicator that this is tornado damage as opposed to just straight line winds where, maybe all the trees are laying in one direction. And so the second image is similar, but it's taken from the different perspective. So it's still an aerial view, but this is from the north, looking to the south down Patterson Road, and you can see the same thing, damage to buildings and numerous trees snapped. This photo is taken by the damage survey, and this is just a ground view of trees snapped. And so when we talk about damage indicators, this is starting to get into estimated winds of around 90 100 miles an hour when we start seeing trees snap at the trunks instead of just branches or limbs broken down. And so at this point in time, the tornado was EF1 strength. Over the next several minutes, up until 3:44, the tornado continued east-northeast towards the town of Gaylord. And so those of you that are familiar with this area, it eventually crossed Van Tyler Road, but before it did, it moved into Shady Brook Lane at 3:34. And so this is where we found more significant damage to this community. And so looking at some of the pictures from that neighborhood, in this picture you can see considerable damage to the roof, basically entire loss of the roofing structure, partial collapse of the garage, and also some branches laying in the foreground from the cleanup. Another house in that community, you can see the garage was completely destroyed, and most of that debris was actually swept down the tornado path. And then, similar to before, we saw numerous trees snapped. Those that didn't snap were heavily bowed, as you can see in this picture. And so, once again, the tornado continued to pick up strength as it moved through less populated areas until it got to Shady Brook Lane. But the first entrance into Gaylord was on the west side of town in the Nottingham Forest area at 3:46. And so, showing you this first picture of Nottingham Forest. And so those of you that are familiar with the Gaylord area, this was taken from the perspective of standing, near the movie theater, but you're standing west looking east, basically down the path of the tornado towards town. And the first thing you notice are two trees, very old trees that are left standing, but they're snapped, maybe 20, 30 feet up. All of the branches that they had were snapped clean. And the mobile homes that were originally in the foreground were completely destroyed. Not only are they completely destroyed, but most of that debris is swept further down, basically along the path of the tornado. So once again, when we're talking about the damage survey and damage indicators, this level of damage correlates to wind speeds in excess of 135 miles an hour when we see mobile homes that are completely destroyed and dislodged from their foundations or where they once stood. And so this is the first location that the tornado got its EF3 rating from. Moving along from that, basically going from west to east at that 3:46 time frame, this is the backside of Hobby Lobby. So a completely different structure than those that were found in Nottingham Forest, but still very serious damage. This is a well-built structure, brick siding that's reinforced by metal rods. So you see exterior walls that are collapsed. A significant part of the roofing collapsed inward. It's also the same story at the backside of Jimmy John's and Maurice's. Same thing, where exterior walls that are brick collapsed, and also significant collapse and damage of the roofing structure. The tornado eventually crossed M32 in town, and this is the Performance Plus oil change. And so once again, this is a different kind of building, so we see different damage or different types of damage to it. You can see almost all of the exterior walls are collapsed, and only the small interior walls are left standing. So in a building like that has big bay doors, what can happen is those really strong winds blow out those doors, and then the rest of the structure can be compromised. And so this is, visually, very considerable damage. And then lastly at 3:46, this is damage from the Goodwill. And so once again, you can see that the weaker walls are not brick. The weaker exterior walls were blown in by the strong winds of the tornado, and that helped to allow, significant part of the roof to collapse inward. The tornado continued to move east-northeast through town. It crossed I-75 at 347, and at 348 it began to move into the neighborhoods north of the downtown area. And so this first picture is of the wooded area. If you're familiar with the St. Mary's Cathedral, which is the red roof building towards the top, it's taken basically from the ball fields looking south. And so this first picture shows, very similar tree damage to what we saw in other locations where those trees are snapped at the trunk. So once again, the tornado was, significant at this point in time. Continuing to move east through that area, we saw, buildings, houses that, their roofs were completely blown off, failure to exterior walls, houses that were shifted off of their foundations. In this picture here, this was once a garage that was completely destroyed, and now all the debris from it is, basically just piled up. And so, basically, as the tornado continued to move through the town of Gaylord, we found very, frequent EF2, EF1 damage all the way through town. And so, at 349, the tornado moved into Berkshire. And so this is where, based on the damage that we found and the damage indicators that were available, this is when the tornado was at its peak strength. And so, like I said, in the Nottingham Forest area, we rated an EF3. This was the second area that also garnered an EF3 rating. And so this first house, you see it's a well-built family home, combination of brick and wood, and you can see that, multiple exterior walls have failed, the roof is completely gone, insulation is, sprayed on the lawn out in front, and this is a second home. So this is the front view of this house, and the garage that was once in the foreground is completely gone. All of its contents, were basically swept down the path of the tornado. But what's more significant is the second picture of this home looking from the side. And so looking from the side, it is evident that almost all of the exterior walls are gone. The contents of the house was blown downstream, and only a few small interior rooms were left standing. And so I know Pat will talk more about tornado safety, but that is why it is so important that when there is a tornado warning, you get to, a small interior room in your home, because those rooms might be the only ones left standing in the event of a strong tornado. That's going to be your safest spot. And so based on the damage that we found here, that garnered estimated wind speeds of 150 miles an hour in order to create this damage. And so the tornado continued to move east, east-northeast, and it got to the edge of town at around 350. It continued out towards the Otsego Club Golf Course, a classic course if anyone's familiar with that. But before that, it moved through this neighborhood, and once again, well-built, two-story home. But the first picture didn't really show that evidence of damage, but this house was able to stay, largely put together. It just got shifted tens of feet off of its foundation, which, once again, that's, it takes very strong winds in order to do that. 351, it really began to move east-northeast to town. It moved over Goslow Road, and so at this location, created damage to this house. This was once a three-story garage that was bolted down, swept completely clean, and the debris was lofted over the road and over the hill on the other side of the road. So once again, very strong winds in order to create damage that looks like that. This is a picture of the back of the house. You can see, damage to the roofing, and that was once a deck there that is now gone. And the last photos that we have were from when the tornado lifted at 357. So it touched down at 335 and continued to 357. So it was on the ground for 22 continuous minutes up until it lifted at this location, which was northeast of Spar. And so these aerial photos show some tree damage, basically, in the wooded area. You can, see trees down in different directions. But this was the last evidence of, tornadic damage that we found on the storm survey. And so with that, transition to some of the radar imagery that came from the event. And so I know Jim was warming you guys up to some radar, but it really is the most important tool that we have, especially in real time, to diagnose storms and analyze storms. And so how a weather radar works is, if anyone's familiar with our office location, it's that big green ball when you drive down south of Otsego Lake. And so what that weather radar does is it sends out a pulse of energy, and then that pulse hits, scatters in the sky. So if there's a storm, whether it's rain or snow or whatever, that pulse hits whatever's in the sky, and then it bounces back. And then based on the amount of energy that comes back, the radar can say, okay, these particles are small, big, and that's what you see on radar reflectivity here. So what's very common is showing reds and pinks as those big particles, really big raindrops, could be hail mixed in there. That's what will show up as your reds and pinks. And then weaker returns is your lighter rain. So yellows, greens, that's what you see. That's what you see here. So as Jim alluded to before, back in the past we didn't have all the information that we have now available to us. And so as I scrub to the left, what is showing is radar velocities. And so those of you that have watched, the news, they'll show radar, and radar velocities at times, especially during severe weather. And what's important about this is it can show areas that are in the storm that are going away and towards the radar. And so you see a mixture of greens and reds on the screen. What that indicates is reds is particles that are moving away from the radar, which in this case, it's in the bottom right hand of the screen. So that's where the radar is located. So anything that is showing up as red is moving away from the radar, and anything that's showing in green is moving towards the radar. And so the brighter those colors are, the brighter reds and the pinks and the brighter greens, that indicates stronger winds. And so what I want you guys to pay attention to really closely is inside of that white circle. And so as I scrub back and forth, you can see that there's decently sized particles showing up on the radar reflectivity, and there's also really strong greens and reds right next to each other in that circle. And what that's indicating is a part of the thunderstorm that is rotating strongly. When you get those really strong, outbounds, as they're called, going away from the radar, and those strong inbounds coming in, that's showing the spin inside of a thunderstorm. And what that can mean is that a tornado is either imminent or it's occurring. And so this radar imagery is taken from 3:35 p.m., which is right when the tornado touched down. And so it's clear on radar, you can see why that makes sense. There's strong velocities, there's a strong couplet, as it's called, and that's a sign that the tornado was very close to occurring. We'll skip ahead to 3:46. So this is radar imagery from right when the tornado was moving into the west side of Gaylord. So as it was moving into Nottingham, as it was moving into the west side of the business district, that's when this radar imagery is from. And so just like the last one, this is showing radar reflectivity, and we can see that inside of that white circle, those returns got redder, or more red. So it could be indicating that there's bigger particles in there. But what's more interesting when I scrub left is I'm showing a different radar product now, and this is called correlation coefficient. And so what this basically shows is how similar those particles that the radar beam is hitting is. So let's say it's all raindrops. Those are all very similar in size. They're basically the exact same size. And so that will show up as your reds that you see on the screen here. If those particles are different in nature, so different size, different shape, those will start to show up as the greens, yellows, and if they're very different, they'll show up as the blues and grays that you see. And so once again, focusing on inside of that white circle, you can see that there's basically a ball of blue and gray radar returns right inside of that circle, which is the same area that we have our strong velocities. And what this is indicating is tornadic debris. And so if you think about debris, it's all different shapes, sizes, orientations, all of that. And so when you have the combination of reliable radar data, velocities, and you start to see signatures like this, that leads to very high confidence that there was a tornado on the ground that is creating damage extreme enough to actually be picked up by radar, by the lowest radar scans in this case. And so the last radar image I'll show you guys is what is a vertical slice. And so how weather radar actually works is it sends out pulses at different elevation angles, and it'll basically give a full volume look at what the atmosphere is. And so what this is doing, it's basically like a cake. So you take a slice out of a cake and you can look at it from the side. That's what this is doing with the radar imagery. So this is basically a side look at the thunderstorm that produced the Gaylord tornado. And you can see those, those strong returns, extending high up in the atmosphere. It's the same products as before. So as I scrub left, you can see those dark blues and grays again. And I'll scrub back and forth so you guys can see it a little bit here, and then I'll leave it right here. So you see those blues and those grays extending almost up to 20,000 feet. That is tornadic debris that is getting wafted inside of a thunderstorm up to that height. So to put that in perspective, Denali, the highest peak on in North America, that's just over 20,000 feet. Mount Everest is around 29,000 feet. So this tornadic debris was getting thrown over almost 4 miles high into the atmosphere. And so once again, this is just radar imagery showing how strong that tornado was. And so with that, after going over the damage and the radar imagery, I'll pass it over to Pat Bach, who will go over some tornado safety and preparedness.
Nice job, Dan. All right, thanks, Dan. I'm sorry, my pictures aren't quite as pretty or as exciting as his, but hopefully I'll be able to share some good information for you. And some of the ideas I had to talk about here is based on things that we heard from talking to people. Like one of the things when we do damage surveys is we actually talk to the people as we walk around, and they kind of tell us what they experienced, how things came together, what they saw, what they didn't see. We try and learn more from them. So we aren't just looking at the damage. We're also talking to the people who experienced it. And one of the things that we hear oftentimes when we go out and do surveys is sometimes we'll hear that they say sometimes we hear it struck without warning, or I didn't hear the warning, or my friend's phone went off but mine didn't go off. And what we basically came up with, we need to have multiple. Sometimes things don't work. Technology is great, but sometimes certain things don't work. So one of the things we want to talk about when we're worried about severe weather is we want to have multiple ways to receive weather warnings. And so I'll just basically talk about some various ways that we can receive warnings, so like if one of your methods fails, that you have something else. The first one I have is no weather radio. And we had the table out there. Those of you, when you came in, we were giving those out through a generous donation we had from someone who wanted to help out the community after the event. But basically, if you're not familiar with weather radio, and you will be when you take those home, but they are, it's a 24-hour/7 broadcast. It's always on. You can turn it on anytime and listen to the weather forecast, but you can also put it in a silent mode, a standby mode, where it will be monitoring for warnings. So you can kind of think of it as a smoke detector for severe weather, right? We want to have smoke detectors in every home. Well, we would like to see weather radios in every home as well, because these are loud enough. They're loud. They squawk just like a smoke detector. So these are loud enough that you can hear from other areas of the house, or if you're sleeping, it's going to wake you up. So that's one way to receive alerts. So another very valuable one that we have here in Otsego County is something called Code Red. And this is where the county can pass along warnings that we issue, but they can also use it to even notify people of like hazardous materials problems or fires or anything that the county emergency management thinks she needs to know. They can get this out into this Code Red system, which will activate your phone. If you haven't signed up for that, it's an opt-in program, so if you don't have it signed up, you will not receive this. You can go to the county's website, and then there's a button in the middle that says Code Red, and you can set up an account and do that. I also have a QR code, and we actually had slips of paper with the QR code on it if you want to just go straight to the registration thing for that. But I encourage you to sign up for that, because it's another way for you to get information, and they would be sending out stuff, like I said, for like hazardous materials, forest fires. Those aren't things that we would be issuing warnings on, but they would be letting you know where things are going on. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit more detail is something called wireless emergency alerts. Now these are things that it's a thing that like the cellular companies are working with the government to try and help get high impact warnings out. So the FCC and the cellular companies. Not everything that goes out in that is weather. Your phone may have gone off sometime for like an Amber Alert for like a child abduction. You may have had those go off before. But certain weather warnings will also trigger your phone. So all tornado warnings will trigger a wireless emergency alert if your phone is capable of receiving it. Higher end severe thunderstorm warnings will, high end flash flood warnings. So not all of flash flood warnings are severe thunderstorms, but just the higher end ones. Snow squall warnings, which we don't issue a lot of those, but those are for like very rapid changes in visibility and high winds that make driving difficult. And basically the thing I want to express is that your phone is going to behave differently based on two factors. It's going to be your phone itself, like how old it is and what capabilities it has built into it, and then also the capabilities of your cellular provider. So everyone, so that's why when we were talking to people, we're like, so my phone went off, but my husband's didn't. And this is kind of what explains that. So you may have had like a different age phone. You may have had, or even if some people have different providers, like your next door neighbor got it, but you didn't. And then also, like mass media, like radio and TV stations are also another way to receive alerts. And then there's various weather apps out there. People always ask us, do we have a weather app? Actually, we don't, but there are many good weather apps out there that also have alerting capabilities built into them. So just a little bit of a further description of the wireless emergency alerts and how that works. So those hexagons you see up there, those are representing where cellular towers are located. So, and the weather alert in this case is in that red box. So if your phone is one of the red phones, and you have one of the most current phones with the wireless WIA 3.0, so it's the third rendition of that. Your phone would only, if you have a phone with that capability, your phone would only go off if you were within the box. If you were outside that box, your phone wouldn't go off. As of last summer, summer 2001, only about 40% or a little bit less phones had the WIA 3.0 capability. So if you were to buy a new phone this year, the chances are better that you would have one that has that capability. If your phone doesn't have that capability for the WIA 3.0, those grayer phones you see, so if you're in any of those hexagons, any of those locations, your phone would go off. So even though you're outside the box, your phone would still go off. And then if you have the black phone, you're in that phone that tower is not within the warning box at all, so that would not be broadcasting an alert. Now, some people, I don't think it happens as much anymore when the phones are more efficient with power, but it used to be that, especially if you had the GPS or location services turned on your phone, it drained your battery real fast, so people would often, they turn the location services off on their phone or their GPS off on their phone to save power. If you have, say if you had one of those modern WIA 3.0 phones, and you would still get, and you turned off your GPS, you would get the phone wouldn't know where it was. So if it received an alert, you would get the alert. So you would get the alert. It wouldn't be as precise as if you had your GPS on. So that's just something to think about. So I just want to go over a few things about places you can get weather information in. I'm sure a lot of you, since you're here, you may have found out about this on one of our social media pages. We have our regular web page, weather.gov/Gaylord. We also have a Twitter and a Facebook page. So we send information out on those. So ways for you to get weather information. If you haven't been to our website, you just go to the website. You can click on the map in the middle. It'll give you a several-day forecast out into the future. We also have the weather story. That's the graphic down in the lower left. Those things, sometimes it's like the forecast for today, but other times we'll have information about potential weather threats over the next coming days. And then at the top of the page, you see right above where it says NWS office in Gaylord, there's a top news. If we're expecting, hazardous weather, there will often be a headline telling about what that threat is. So, these are not push things. You actually have to go to them, but, there's a lot of information on this page. So, and then, because there's often confusion, once you receive the various things, what does a watch mean? What does a warning mean? So I thought we'd talk about that just for quickly. So a severe weather watch, and it could be a thunderstorm watch, a tornado watch, a flash flood watch. It's just basically saying, conditions are favorable for whatever the hazard is in that area. And it typically covers, quite a few counties and, or even a whole state or a couple of states, and it lasts for several hours. So basically, it doesn't mean things have happened yet, but you need to be prepared for hazardous weather in the not too distant future. These are issued by the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, and they collaborate with us, and we kind of decide which counties we want in it. This is the watch box from the day of the Gaylord tornado. You see the counties were in there. Pretty much the majority of our area was in it, but you see the outline of the polygon that the watch was in effect for. And then a warning, that is when the expected severe weather event is occurring or it's imminent. And these generally are not more than a couple of counties or portions of a few counties. And the warning polygon is covering the highest threat area. So this is one of the polygons from the Gaylord tornado. So you see it starts out kind of tight at the left side, and that's where, right around where the storm is, and then it spreads a little bit wider as you go, and that's to account for the uncertainty in how exactly that storm is going to track. So, and then you can see like the entire Gaylord area, like, see out Seagull Lake, they were not in the box. So if you had one of the WIA 3.0 phones, your phone likely would not have gone off if you were just south of that box. But if you had one of the older phones and you were down south of that area, like along Otsego Lake, your phone would have gone off probably because it would have been from one of the cell towers in that area. So just criteria for severe thunderstorms, winds of 58 miles per hour or greater, and people might say, well, why 58 miles per hour? And that's just because we talk in nautical miles per hour typically in meteorology, and 50 knots is 50 statutory miles per hour, which is what we're more accustomed to. Hail of 1 inch diameter or larger, which is the size of a quarter, and then a tornado. So if we had we would go with a severe thunderstorm warning if we expected the wind or the hail to be the primary threat. And we would issue, and then if there's a tornado warning, we would expect a tornado to be one of the primary threats, but you can still get damaging straight line winds and hail with that. So just, we're talking a lot about cookies tonight, but just so you know the difference, a watch, we have the ingredients Dan was talking about, they're in place, and we may have cookies, but everything has to come together right for those cookies to be there. So watch doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen, but it's a time for us to be more prepared. We want to be alert, think about where we're going to be like say there's a watch out for 6 hours. Where are you going to be during the 6 hours? It's time to think about where you're going to be, and maybe decide not to go too far from a safe shelter. And then when the warning is out, if you're under the warning, that means cookies are happening within that and expected to affect that warning area, but not everyone's going to be impacted within the warning. Like you saw in the case of the tornado, compared to the size of the warning box, the tornado path was small, but there's some you have to allow for some deviation from the line, because you can see from the tornado track they rarely go in a straight line. So we also want to just talk a little bit about some safety things. One slogan the Weather Service has is, when thunder roars, go indoors. We don't issue warnings for all thunderstorms, but all thunderstorms produce lightning, and so all thunderstorms can be deadly. And Michigan being an outdoor-oriented state, even though we don't have a lot of thunderstorms compared to some of the other states, we actually are a little bit higher than you would expect as far as lightning fatalities, and that's just because I think a lot of what we do is outdoors. So it's just something to think about. You don't want to be outside, during a thunderstorm. If it's a non-severe storm, getting inside a building or even your vehicle is a safe place to go. Okay, Dan talked a little bit, about how the structures are built and, the safest places to be during a tornado. Your worst options during a tornado are going to be a mobile home or a vehicle, because as we saw from the damage in this case, those can be picked up and tossed. So you want to get out of those situations. Also, big like a room like this, or a gymnasium at a school, those are also not good. Large span roof, it's easier for those to become compromised and to collapse. But a better option, getting into a well-built home in an interior room, preferably a basement if you have one. But if you don't, as we saw, some of those homes didn't have basements, but they had those interior rooms that stayed intact. And then we're not going to have any. I don't think anyone around here has a storm shelter, and not even a lot of places in Oklahoma have those. But basically, you go in for during the warning, and you come out when the warning is clear. And just another picture showing the safe places to be in a house. Lowest level of your home, an interior room, away from windows. Windows and doors are going to be the first things to fail, so you want to get inside and away from that. So another thing that, from talking to people in the aftermath of the tornado, anytime you have a traumatic event like a tornado, some people who didn't have weather anxiety before, we generally don't have a lot of severe thunderstorm type weather up here. So there are people who are, rightfully so, a little bit anxious about the weather, and we heard, even anytime there was thunder, people were getting, concerned. So, and the statistics say that 1 in 10 Americans suffer from storm anxiety. So what can we do to improve that? So when you're prepared for something, you feel more comfortable. So the best thing to do is to develop a plan. How will you be notified? Have multiple ways to receive those alerts, like we just talked about. Think about where you're going to be when the weather is potentially dangerous, and think ahead about where you're going to take shelter. In your house or in your vehicle, have a preparedness kit. Things like water flashlights. This holds true for winter as well. If you're going to be out, or if you're going to, we're going to have a big storm and you may be stuck at your house for a few days, you want to have some stuff around, just to tide you over till you can get out again. But in this case, you want to, if you're like a family, you say, hey, we're all going to meet at this location. And anytime you have any kind of plan, you want to practice that plan as well. And that could be as simple as just talking about it with your family. Like, this is what we're going to do, and this is where we're going to go. Another ways to reduce anxiety is just to learn your local geography. Some people, I'd be surprised how many people don't know like where road references are or county lines are. And sometimes the warnings we issue will have like mentions of towns or mentions of intersections of major roads. If you know where those are, you can say, well, is that coming my way or not? You can get a better feel for, so you can know whether you need to be immediately concerned or not. Something else, every spring we have storm spotter classes where we go into more detail about thunderstorm development, how to stay safe, and how to make reports to help us help you. So maybe attending one of those would make you feel better. Anytime you have more knowledge about something, you feel more comfortable with it. And again, like I said, we get practice getting everybody into a safe place, and always go to credible sources. Anyone knows, you'll find stuff on social media that is incorrect, or just plain, a little bit incorrect, or something that's very incorrect. But if you go to a reputable source like like the Weather Service, or County Emergency Management, or your local media, TV station, radio station, you can have more confidence when you hear with those. There is a web page that was put together on the Norman, Oklahoma Weather Service office page. It's called Storm Anxiety. If you were to Google NWS Storm Anxiety, you'd be able to find that. So that's about all I have. I do have a list of links here. Some of our web pages, some preparedness pages, which I encourage you to check out. There's also the Otsego County Code Red. You could actually scan that QR code off the screen, and we do have some slips of paper out there that have all these listed on there, as well as over by the weather radio table, over by that simulated tornado, where you can get that information as well. That's also got the QR code on it. All right, so that is what I have as far as presenting. So what we're going to do now is Dan's going to come back up, and we're going to get our question and answer session going here. And Michael Stevens from 9 and 10 News is also going to join us. And what we're, sorry, do you want that? You want to take that? I think they're gonna, he's got us there.
Hi, hello, can you hear me? No? No, it's okay, I was just grabbing water. Might need it. So I'll go ahead and start off. I think I mentioned it before, but we'll go over some of our personal experiences from that day. So all of us were involved in the event. And so from my perspective, I started off actually on an overnight shift. So I worked, the event was on a Friday, May 20th was a Friday, so I worked Thursday night into Friday, and I got off shift at 5 a.m., and I figured I was going to get called in for the next day. And so my wife, she's a teacher in town, and it's hard to explain. It's just one of those days where you have a bad feeling about things. There's going to be risk for severe weather that day. And so before she woke up, I shot her a text. I was like, hey, there's going to be severe storms today. Tornadoes are going to be possible, especially early in the afternoon. I was like, so, right around school dismissal, I was like, just be careful, be weather aware, and, just be prepared. And so, went to sleep and then woke up and I got called in. For those of you that were here a little bit early, Jim alluded to it, but I was one of the radar operators that day. And so from an office operations perspective, you can kind of think of it like a sports team. So, everyone has their different roles. So if you're a football fan, there's the offensive line, quarterback, wide receivers, and there's defensive players. That's kind of how our severe weather operations work in our National Weather Service forecast office. So, we have forecasters that are on social media. We have meteorologists that are answering phone calls from spotter lines. We have, those that are just watching the environment and changes in the environment. We talked about the ingredients necessary for severe storms. And so I was one of the operators that day, and specifically I was the one who issued the tornado warnings for that day for the Gaylord Tornado. And so, with that being said, it's hard to explain the emotions and things you have to suppress in the back of your head during an event like that. And we went over how rare an event like that is. And so, as I issue the warning, it's you're completely zoned into the task at hand. That is as serious as it gets. As far as from a meteorological perspective, you're issuing a tornado warning. That's it's a life or death situation that you're warning on, and you're making professional decisions on that. But also, this is the town that I live in. It's not just it's not just a warning. It's we know people in town and things like that. And so we went over some of the radar signatures, and so from a professional standpoint, it's difficult to see that unfold in real time on radar as you see a tornadic thunderstorm move closer and closer to the town where, Gaylord's a tight-knit community. It's not like a big city. We know a lot of people. Like I said, my wife's a teacher. We're involved in the community. So, we go to the store and we see people that we know. And it's so, I know that people that, we're close to in town are in danger. And so, as soon as I saw some of those radar signatures, I picked up my phone and I shot, my wife a text as fast as I could. And I was like, this is as real as it gets for Gaylord. Text people that to take cover now. And so, with that being said, and I kind of, just talked about it, but, that's something I really want to emphasize, to you guys. It's, the Weather Service office in Gaylord, like Gaylord is our community. There were many of us that, had family, friends, that were impacted or very close to, being impacted during that. And so, it was an event that was really close to us. And so, even in the days to follow, after that, I was a part of the damage survey, that went out the next day, which was Saturday morning. So we spent, basically all of Saturday, starting from the beginning of the tornado all the way to the end, assessing the damage. It was out Sunday, helping clean up. And that's the one thing that, I really want to, emphasize to everyone here is, the sense of community, how everyone came together, the emergency response was just incredible. It was incredible to see that, in the days following, and that's something that personally I'll never forget from that event.
All right, I think my mic works now. All right, cool. First of all, I just want to say thank you everybody for coming, and thank you National Weather Service Office for inviting me to be here. As these guys have pointed out, and with the amazing show you both put on, this is very rare for Northern Michigan. I'm from Cadillac. I was born in Reed City. My first 5 years of life, I was in Everett. My parents split. My mom moved me up to Cadillac. That's where I attended school. That's where I graduated. But Gaylord was always a place we visited, whether it was sports activities, played hockey, football, and baseball up here against your teams. We'd always come up here to, to see. We'd always go north, but we'd always make a stop in Gaylord because we always considered Gaylord the gateway to the north, right? But we'd always stop at the museum or Big Buck Brewery, and we'd always make a stop after hockey. But Gaylord that day, we just knew in Northern Michigan, it was one of those days, and I was talking to these guys beforehand, as a meteorologist, when you go out, sometimes you can just feel something's not right. It was one of those days, and a few days prior, at the station, the Doppler 910 weather team, Tom, myself, and Madison Reich at the time, we said, we have what we call alert days, weather alert. Which is different from what these guys issue. We're not issuing anything, but we just want you to be prepared for what weather is on the way. And one of those days, especially that Friday, we knew it was not going to be, ideal weather. And we only issue those when it comes to, possibly life-threatening conditions. And that morning I got up, I went to work, and kind of going through my day, nothing really happened in the morning. And thankfully it was a Friday because afternoons are usually busy for me, but that afternoon I was like, well, I'll just stay at the station and I'll make sure nothing pops up, nothing comes through, because if it does, I have to be on air, I have to alert you all and whoever's watching TV. About 2:30, 3 o'clock, Tom came in, our chief meteorologist, and I was doing some stuff, making sure things were good, and he's like, look at the storms over in Wisconsin, they're coming across the lake. I was like, at the time, they weren't that big. They weren't really a huge problem. But as soon as they started crossing Lake Michigan and entering our zone, it was like, okay, these are storms that we need to watch very closely. And then as they got to Lake Michigan shoreline, they started gaining a little more strength, and we were breaking in for them. And as soon as they got past Grand Traverse County into more Antrim and Kalkaska County, I was like, okay, we were looking at everything he showed you. We were also looking at the station. We were looking at the upper air. We were looking at the radar. And Tom just happened to change it to the winds, where he showed you the green and reds. And at the time, there was a line just past Mansalona that was 111. It was white. And I was like, that's not right. I was like, Tom, we need to watch this cell very closely, because there was 2 or 3 other cells, I believe, that were severe at the time, north and south. But this cell in particular just had something different with it. And I was like, I'm going to go back to the wall. I'm going to break in, let everyone know, this is something we're watching closely. And went back to the TV, or went to the wall. They put me on TV, and we showed it just east of Mansalona. And as it was starting to kind of move northeast, that's when we started seeing the winds slowly starting to develop. And I went back to the computer, and I just got off TV, and we hit those upper winds again, and you could see it right at Star Township starting to organize. I was like, Tom, that's a tornado. He's like, all right, go back to the green screen. We'll get you on air. And with TV rules, well, not really rules, but how we do warnings, if it's a tornado warning, I'm not leaving the screen until it's gone. I want to make sure anybody who tunes in knows what's happening for that exact location. If you're somewhere else in the 34, 35 counties that we cover, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to deal with me while I'm warning these people at the moment. And trust me, we do get complaints sometimes. If it's, the middle of a good CSI, people are not happy if it's not their storm, But we want to keep you all safe. And 5 seconds later, the warning came out from these guys. And we work hand in hand. We have a really good relationship. There's a chat that we actually are all a part of, that we can talk to each other. So we are very close contact with these guys. I don't think we make any phone calls, but we do talk to you guys over the computer, because these guys are busy just as much as we are. And that day I was at the green screen. Tom was doing a lot of the stuff, getting the graphics ready and kind of running the computer, because as soon as we saw those winds start to organize, we knew something was not right in heading towards Gaylord, because it was heading straight northeast. So we were on air right at 3:30 and 3:35, and we stayed with all the way past 4 o'clock. Even the 4 started, and I was still at the wall. Xavier had to wait for me for the tornado warning to end, which is protocol. But there's things you learn in, they can probably attest to this too, when you're in meteorology school or getting your meteorology degree, meteorology school, when you're going to college learning meteorology, you learn about hook echoes and tornadoes. And here in northern Michigan, a tornado, most times you can't really see it on the radar unless you're looking at the winds aloft, or it's rain wrapped, you don't see it going through. But this was very textbook in the fact that the storm, the center of itself was north. This had a hook echo, and the tornado, you could see it. There was no really rain with it or anything like that. So it was rare that we had that big of a tornado in Gaylord. It was rare that it was 85 degrees on a late May day at 3:30 in a very populated area. Me and Tom looked at each other and said, this is not going to be good. So we stayed with and followed the tornado all the way through. We got confirmation that it was on the ground, I believe, from the National Weather Service chat via troopers relaying that the tornado was on the ground. And right after that, video started coming in because, like I told you, everybody was out. It's 85 degrees at 3:30. People are either home, coming home from work, kids are getting out of school. Everybody was enjoying a very warm day. And it crossed two busy highways and interstate. So everybody had videos flowing in, and we're like, wow, that's a big tornado. After I was done, after it picked up out of Otsego and Montmorency County, our news director came in and said, go to Gaylord. I was like, okay, I'm on my way to Gaylord. And I got dressed, and then there was another warning for Presque County. And Tom's like, just go. I got this one covered. I was like, all right. So I drove up here to Gaylord. And mind you, I'm not a reporter. I'm a meteorologist. So I've never been really a reporter or anything. And I got into town at about 5:30, 6 o'clock. And I ran into a trooper. I got spit out right where it crossed from really Nottingham and the backside of Hobby Lobby. And I was like, is it okay if I stop here? And as soon as I pulled into town, the news and reporter, journalist, meteorologist of me went away. It was, my neighbors are in trouble, I need to help. So I parked my car, and the trooper was very nice, let me get out and help anyway. There was a couple from Petoskey that was an EMS there helping at the Hobby Lobby. There was people just coming out of some of the buildings and places right next to where all this happened. Mind you, that was 3 hours or 2.5 hours prior. They were just starting to make their way out and see what happened. And it's still tough to talk about this because it humanizes you very quickly. Mind you, I wanted to be a tornado chaser as a kid. And I went to school with those aspirations, but I was like, I've never seen a tornado. I don't know if I want to do that. So I went to the TV side. I have a meteorology degree with an emphasis in broadcasting and a physics minor. And what I stood in that day was a 200-yard path of destruction through a heavily populated town. So I instantly started saying, the news director was texting me. I was like, I'm helping. I'm not sending you guys anything right now. These people need help. So at about that time, the sheriff was driving around, and they had that curfew in place. They said, you need to get out of here. People will take care of this. You need to go to the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. And that's where I ran into a lot of people, EMS, as well as troopers, and everybody was doing what they needed to do to make sure Gaylord was taken care of. And I was just there. I was like, I went to every trooper, I think, and every EMS. I asked them if you need anything, because I was just there for the most part. It was just me. I didn't have a FOJO with me or anything. I was like, do you need water? I'll go get you water. Like, is there anything I can help with here? Because they're in between 6 o'clock and really, I think I went live at 7 just to kind of tell what was happening at the time. There wasn't much going on or that I could really do, so I was just asking anybody that could help. And about that time, we had, they were texting me, hey, the governor's coming up. She's coming up to sign a bill and all that. And I was like, okay. But I had the opportunity at the 10 o'clock news to ask the governor a question. And my big thing was I want her to, speak humanly. I don't want a politician to answer. I want her to give the people of Gaylord her thoughts and what they can do, what people can do, and what people can expect, because you guys are my neighbors. I spent a lot of time in Gaylord as a kid, and Gaylord was always home. And I knew just the way that the people were responding in Gaylord, they were coming together, they were doing what they could, and I really didn't see just how amazing a community comes together until Monday. We came back up Monday, and we were doing the 4 at the Goodwill. And during the day, they were getting the show ready, but again, for me, I was like, I don't have anything to do, I'm just gonna walk around. So I walked around through the community, and I stopped, I got a block in, and there was a house with a tree on it. There's 2 guys chopping the tree up. I was like, oh, maybe they own the house. There was 2 women picking the trees up, putting it in a trailer. I was like, well, maybe they're moving that wood. There were 6 people at this house. None of them even knew who owned the house. They were there taking care of everything, and the women just happened to drive by with the trailer, picked up, and I was like, well, I'm gonna help them load the trailer, and I helped the guys cut the wood, and then I moved on to the next block. There was water, there was food. It was amazing to see the community, every house, every person was doing something in some shape and form. He pointed out the ball fields by St. Mary's, where I ended up down that way, and there was a class of kids raking, doing what they could. And I took a picture, and I didn't know where they were from. I posted on Facebook, and somebody says, that's the kids from St. Mary's. In fact, I just got it reassured to me this walking in today. I work at St. Mary's, and that was awesome to see those kids out there. And I did probably about a square mile walking around, and I got back to Xavier about 3:30. He's like, where you been? I was like, I was just helping. I was walking around helping. And we did the show, and the one thing that we wanted to hit home real hard was the amazingness of the people in Gaylord. The rarity of the situation was huge in itself, but the fact that Gaylord came together the way they did was huge. Something I do want to hit on with Pat, though, was talking about how you can stay connected. Don't forget about TV. When there's things like that, we're on air for you. That's why, those stations, you can get them anyway, whether it's a streaming service or whether it's an antenna. That is an easy way for you to see what's coming, because we are getting stuff from them just as they get reports from us, working hand in hand. That's a way to do it. And like you said, weather apps, that is a great way to do it as well. But if you want something right now, look at the radar, what's happening, where's it going. We have just about the exact same tools as they do to let you know when it's going to be there, where it's going. And what I really pride myself in my job is being able to help anybody who does need the help. Just like these guys, I have a degree in meteorology. It's just my face is on TV. Their face isn't. They're at the desks doing some hard work and relaying that information. So it was wonderful to be in Gaylord to help in a bad situation. But what I really took away from it was the humanity aspect of it was huge. And that day will never leave me, because that was the first time I ever stood in the wake of a tornado. I don't even see them much, growing up in northern Michigan. I will say the first time I ever did a TV job was I had to break in for a tornado in North Dakota. North Dakota is a little bit different than northern Michigan. But when it happens at your home, your neighbors, that's where it makes more of an impact. And that was basically my Friday and weekend with Gaylord on that storm.
Right. Thanks, Michael. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll just keep my comments brief so we have time for you guys to ask some questions. Basically for me, I've been in the weather service 29 years. I'm a Chicago area native, so we had more severe weather down there. About half of my weather service career was at the Central Illinois office of the weather service. And during my time there, I was working the radar like Dan for 2 EF4 tornadoes and did the damage assessment on those. And the damage was, again, as you might imagine, significant. It's hard to go through those things because people are impacted and you don't want to see that. But this was different because those 2 EF4s, they were significant, but it was different when this one was, so this is where I live now, and to have it, go through town where I live, it was pretty impactful. Like Dan said, he was texting his wife. My wife texted me, she's like, should we go to shelter? And I'm like, yes. And then one of the first things I did when it was approaching town was like, I called John Deming, the county emergency manager, to let them know, like, hey, this is real. We're not used to this up here. So, certain parts of the country, they grow numb. But it's like, we're not used to this around here. So, I mean, it's just a whole nother thing when it's affecting people the area very closely. And the one thing I could say, it's just echo what's been said by Dan and Michael, is that, the way the community came together was just amazing, helping neighbors and everyone coming together and helping each other, I thought was just fantastic. The other thing I thought too is, these things don't happen very often. But the way the county came together, not just, like the first responders, the emergency managers, well, the way all the agencies worked together to get everything back to somewhat normal as quickly as they did, considering, this isn't something they deal with every day, I was just really impressed. And I think everyone should be proud of themselves, and everybody in the county should be proud of how we all came together and how everything worked. So